This is Abe Friedtanzer from ShockYa, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with Michel Gill, an actor who is coming soon to a number of shows near you. How are you doing today, Michel?
I'm very well, Abe. How are you?
Good, good. I've been watching you for a while on a bunch of shows, which I want to talk about a bit later. But let's
Sure.
start with the two series that you're on right now. I'm curious, especially about The Dropout, because that's a real life story that I know I had heard about. I saw the documentary that was made about it. How familiar were you with that story before that project came along?
Pretty familiar. I mean, I'd heard about it, and I may have been a little more familiar than most people. But then I listened to the podcast, The Dropout, watched a couple of the documentaries, and started reading up on her and the whole situation. So by the time we started shooting, I was pretty well versed in the situation and was quite disturbed.
Oh, absolutely. And what did you know of the character, that the person that you're actually playing?
There wasn't not a whole lot, but there was some stuff that was enough for me to bite into. Historically, the family they came from, the Fleischmann yeast legacy, and then he had also gone down with Enron. He was also into public service. He was a rather entitled guy, but also found some sort of way to come back and give back to public service and be involved in that way and make it less about money, even though his grandfather and father had squandered his inheritance and the extraordinary wealth he came from. So when it came to his children, I think he was trying to focus a purpose in their lives, because everything else can just sort of go away. But as long as you have purpose, meaningful purpose, that you're going to be in good stead. And so he was a bit rough, possibly, very disciplinarian in that way, wanted to ensure that his kids, particularly Elizabeth, because I think that they were like-minded in so many ways, and he was pretty impressed with her and her ambition and stuff, and he wanted to rein her in. But in that sense, I think he was very much about making sure she could be successful, but more importantly, to really emphasize the purpose in life. And I think that's where things went a little off.
That's true. And when you are playing someone who is a real person, do you approach that differently from a lot of the admittedly very meaty roles that you've played in the past that are not actually based on someone real?
You know, it's hard. I've never played Jack Kennedy. I've never had to play somebody that everybody is incredibly familiar with. So I sort of interpret characters, but everybody's real. Every character I've played, they're real people. And so the stretch is not that sort of daunting. It's, if you can emotionally tie into the human being, the better off you are. I'm a father, I'm a husband. He's a dad, he's a husband. You go for the basic things that drive a human being in life. And then their needs, desires, why are they here? Where are they going? Everybody's very similar in that way. Everybody has a code of some kind. You just have to tap into that humanity, and that particular humanity. And I love, obviously, actors just love doing that.
And I do think there's something that I see in common with a lot of your roles, which is you play people who have a lot of power, but are usually at a point where they're really falling from grace. Is there something about that moment in the trajectory that just appeals to you?
No, it's, there was a time for a good portion of my early career, I played some duplicitous characters. But because when I was young anyway, I had a very sort of charming aspect about me. People hired me and cast me specifically so that it would be misleading to the audience. Because what a nice boy, nice guy. And then suddenly something happens, they're going, huh, that's not so nice. And then, oh no, he's nice again. And it was always a fun line to play with, because I had that sort of look. It was more of a nice guy than not. And when you are a nice guy, as look, everybody's a nice guy. Everybody's nice. It's just the horror that's sometimes behind people. So I spent a lot of time doing that in my earlier career. This other thing that came along with incredibly powerful people who were just compromised in some way at some point, it's a very difficult part to play, especially, for instance, in House of Cards, because, as Michael, I'm looking at this character going, get a grip. Do you see what's in front of you? And then to justify it, I had to just think about all the people in my cabinet that were advising me, and he was just one, and the audience just happened to be seeing him. And villains are villains. I mean, Iago makes a fool of Othello, the greatest general the world had ever seen, and suddenly Iago is diminishing him to a mewling, puking child. And so, powerful people are easily manipulated, and surprisingly so, even great, powerful people. And it's a sad thing to watch. And in 2 hours or 3 hours, Othello goes down. In a series, I had 2 years.
Well, since you brought up House of Cards, I do want to talk about that for a second, mainly for two reasons. The first is that the presidential scandal that engulfs your character there seems so pale and nothing compared to the real world now. It felt so dramatic at the time, but do you think that would play the same these days, or has the world of politics gotten so ridiculous that no one would even bat an eye at any of that?
I think that's why it's dated already. I think people, when we go to DC and hang out with politicians, and they'd be, that's not possible. That's nobody's throwing anybody under a train. And we're like, no, it's a metaphorical sort of being pushed under a bus, dude. I mean, that happens all the time. And it was dark. And it was dark when we watched it as well. And I used to think with my wife, who was in it as well, Jane Atkinson, we used to sit there and just feel at some point, sometimes we just had to go maybe just take a shower to just wash that show off. And then the world happened, and it paled in comparison, and it was difficult to take seriously, honestly, because, everything had been elevated to such a degree that, although what I love about House of Cards and what we can always appreciate about it is it's the Shakespearean aspect of it. There is something really theatrical, character-driven about it. And so it's less about the course of events that we have to inevitably compare to today. And it's more about the manipulation and the way, Kevin played this part and Robin played her part, and how all the characters really were part of this incredibly theatrical production. And I thought that was quite rich and wonderfully performed. So I think that will always stay with House of Cards. But the content, people kept on comparing it to life. And we kept on saying, this is Shakespeare superimposed on what you think looks familiar. Of course, this doesn't happen in this way, but it does in Shakespeare. And so we're fusing the two worlds together and never let go of that idea because that's all it is.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. The other thing that is completely different, I think, about that is that this was less than a decade ago, but at that point, there weren't all these streaming services. There wasn't a new Netflix show premiering every single week and globally and all that. This was one of the first shows that really put Netflix on the map. It also was 13 episodes, I think, at the start and a little less towards the end. But now these new shows, I think The Dropout is 8 episodes, Gilded Age, I think, is 9, that we are in just such a different place right now with all of that. I don't know what my question is. I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss.
It is really interesting, and it's all about storytelling. And the industry and the storytellers are trying to figure out how best to tell a story and what captivates an audience and how long the attention span is of the audience and how long you can drag out a story and how detrimental that can actually be to the story. So where a series used to last 22 episodes a season, now you're trying to tell real character-driven stories that are very different from sort of the sequel, the Law and Order, where it could be just a different story every week, Friends, that could be just a different scenario every week with this ongoing friendship of all of them. I mean, this is now taking storytelling to a whole different level, where movies are being compromised, because now we can watch something with such extraordinary content and just enjoy it for 8 hours or 13 hours and get to really dig in. And I think that's a really sort of a fascinating thing, because for so long we were brought up with story that lasted to 2 to 3 hours, 2.5 hours, 90 minutes sometimes. And we would watch, and you know, as young people and young adults, we were influenced by success in a story that would occur in 90 minutes. And the journey was just so easy. And we just got very confused about how to become successful or how to have a journey in life, because it was all a 90-minute, 120-minute experience. And we just thought, okay, I'm going to go out there and get it done in 120 minutes. And I think, you know, as an audience, we've been a little confused about story, our stories, our journeys, and how self-gratification, quick gratification we've been influenced by that. And I think now we're stretching it out a little bit, which might help us give ourselves a little break in the stories of our lives, to just not expect things too fast, too soon, that things take time. So I think it's just, the world is just bubbling over with this new equation, figuring out and how to tell every and any particular story in its best form. So yes, that a limited series with 8 episodes for The Dropout, I think, is going to be really condensed and powerful and bookended.
That's fair. And there's another role that you were, a show that you were on, Mr. Robot, which, even though that's a few years ago, I still think that's one that feels very futuristic in a lot of ways, just because of the nature of its storytelling. And I just, it's one, that pilot especially, I still think about that all the time. I think it created, in the way, I mean, we can talk about Julian Fellowes creates worlds, we'll get to that in a minute. But if you're talking about just the building of something so unlike what we've seen, I just don't know what the experience of that must have been like working on.
I'll tell you the experience of just reading that script, just reading that pilot. I read it in the speed of light. It was a page. I put that thing down and I told Jane, this is freaking cool. And I didn't know what I was going to do with the character that I was meeting them about, because he was described in all kinds of ways that were conflicting, that were just incongruent to me trying to make sense of it. But I knew this was an extraordinary project, and little did I know really how extraordinary Sam Esmail was, and Rami, and the cast, and the minute we dove into it, it was a wonderful experience. Sam is just an incredibly powerful talent and creative force, and I just felt so safe in his presence and on the set. And it was an extraordinary breakthrough story, and I think it was beautifully done. That's
great. And then we have something completely different, which is The Gilded Age. I'm sure that based on the fact that you're clearly a history buff and you like Shakespeare, I have a feeling that you're also a fan of Downton Abbey. But how did this role come along for The Gilded Age?
I was offered the part. I looked at it, and I barely looked at it. It was like Julian Fellowes, Gilded Age, Michael Engler. Absolutely, sure. Tell me where and when. So that was an easy decision. The world of The Gilded Age, having gone to drama school, I spent a lot of time in those costumes, a lot of time in period pieces in the 19th century, 17th, 16th, all these centuries. And I just feel, we were trained in this. We were practiced in this. We worked on all kinds of aspects of behavior and stance and, just movement. Everything was focused on classical plays. So for me to put that outfit on and that top hat and to have any kind of facial hair that creates the period, and to look around and to see everyone else in costumes like that. It's like putting on an old glove. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I have to also give kudos to our dialect coach, Howard Samuelson, because he was, first of all, a classmate of mine at Juilliard. So he's gone down that road of being, one of the great dialect coaches we have here in this country. And, that helps as well, having a uniformity of the way people speak at the time. And it helps bring people in and have people lean in to, this is a different time. And I just think, oh my God, how fun. Any time I can put a costume on like that, it's great.
That's wonderful. I don't want to talk too much more about that because people need to see the show before we get into more about your character.
Yeah.
So obviously you're in two of these, the biggest shows right now. What's next for you?
I'm looking for something. As actors, we'll never work again the minute a project is over. So that's okay. My wife and I are exploring Colorado as we speak. We're in Boulder and we have a 6-month-old puppy. With our 14-year-old puppy. We have a 23-year-old son in Brooklyn. So we're overseeing a lot of family stuff, and that's really helpful and peaceful at this time. And at the same time, we're looking for projects and trying to find something that fits for where we're at right now. But these two projects, I'm just thrilled about being a part of, and an enormous pool of talent in both. It's extraordinary. And it's very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, it's really great to be able to just unpack all of this and talk about these older roles and the newer roles. And I wish you plenty of luck in the future. It was really great to be able to meet with you today.
Lovely to meet with you, Hey. Take care.